Western Europe, and there was this enormous influx of people from the Middle East and Northern Africa. People were moving there not because they didn't want to continue living in the home where the family had been for 17 generations. They did want to continue living there. They loved that place. But there was no longer habitat. They could no longer grow food. So they were fleeing to someplace better. And the Western European people couldn't stop talking about how horrible those people were. We're all running out of habitat. We're all going to be fleeing at some point. How we act in the face of those seemingly impossible odds defines our character. So, maybe we'll persist to 5 or 6 or 12 or 22 degrees above baseline. We don't know. We are very clever. You got to hand it to us for that. The point of the paper in The Guardian is that we need habitat. When we're in the Dust Bowl that never ends, and this is one from the late 1950s in the southwestern United States, the food goes away. At some point we become the livestock that run out of food. We depend upon a living planet for our own survival. We depend upon pollinators and filter feeders for food and water, respectively. We depend upon a complex flora in our own bodies so that we can process what we take in. We depend upon all these other things, but we act as if we don't. On July 15th, 2016, a person named Sam Carana put out an article, and I responded to it with an article of my own at h/guyfirst.com on the 1st of August 2016 called The Politics and Science of Our Demise. Sam Carana is an anonymous person. He is 2 or maybe 3 people in Western Europe and the United States, and that's why Sam Carana can keep his day job. Because I promise anybody who writes or speaks about the kinds I write and speak about won't be supported in their job for very long. So the Sam Caranas know this, Sam or Samantha, and so they don't reveal who they are. They're obviously quite adept. They understand climate change in great detail. And they put together this information in a way that makes it easily understandable. I take on Sam Carana's analysis with an analysis of my own, and considering the 10-year lag between carbon dioxide emissions and maximum heating associated with those molecules, considering the rise above global average temperature so far since the beginning of civilization, the 1750 baseline, considering the removal of the aerosol masking effect, or the so-called global dimming impact, and other self-reinforcing feedback loops, Carana comes up with 10.02 degrees Celsius above baseline, which would take us to the highest temperature ever recorded over the course of the last 2 billion years. That would take us to right up here. So I take a more conservative look and cobble together, add together all of the self-reinforcing feedback loops and the current rise in temperature. I take a more conservative approach than Carana does, and I come up with only at least 8.7 degrees Celsius above the 1750 baseline by mid-2026, 10 years from now. As an indication of how conservative this assessment is, consider, for example, further feedbacks. I identify more than 5 dozen in this essay, further feedbacks. And Carana adds on only 0.3 degrees Celsius global average temperature rise from 1750 to 2026 as a result of these further feedbacks. One of them is from terrestrial permafrost degrading and giving off carbon dioxide, and especially methane. So there's subsea methane, and there's also terrestrial permafrost that is leaking methane. So there's this paper in Siberian Times from July of 2016, there's the title of it right there, and it includes this little video clip. So I'm going to play this little video clip, and I want you to listen at about the 15-second mark. The second time the man punches his heel into the ground, into what looks like a trampoline or jello instead of permafrost, which by definition is permanently frozen and therefore hard. Second time he stabs his heel into the ground, you'll hear over the loud noise of the microphone, you'll hear a high-pitched hissing sound. That's pressurized methane and carbon dioxide spewing out of the earth. So listen carefully. It's not supposed to do that, but I can't believe he's doing this, right? Like he might fall in and we never see him again. So he's pushing on the permamelt, and not this time, but the next time he sticks his heel in the ground, listen real close. You hear that? That's pressurized methane and carbon dioxide leaking directly out of the soil surface in what used to be permafrost.
Yikes.
Yeah. Yikes. I've heard it put other ways, but yikes is good enough for this crowd. The bottom line is that my entire life we thought we could keep living the same way and the kids would somehow adapt. And that is why Serena Raphael's friend was crying and attempting to commit suicide. Because hers is the generation, the millennials are the generation that are getting crapped on. And we expect them to fix it. Nobody adapts to a planet without habitat. That's why 150 to 200 species are being driven to extinction every day. They're running out of habitat. That's why there are so few great apes in the world. They're running out of habitat. There are more humans born every day than the sum total of all non-human great apes in the world.
Bacteria.
That seems like it's a problem. I think you got this figured. Okay, again, I'd like to point out that the synthesis is that on planet 4C hotter, or maybe 5 or 6, humans won't have habitat anymore. And that's, I think, optimistic, given that we've only had humans at this relatively narrow range in temperatures. Now, when I point out the 10-year time frame of Carana's analysis, almost everybody in the audience assumes, let's see, he wrote his paper July 15th, 2016, and he said in 10 years it's going to be this high temperature, and humans probably won't adapt. So I think probably on July 14th, 2026 at midnight, I'm going to die. No, that's not what I mean. In fact, it could be a lot worse than this. I was interviewed by a mainstream media pundit, a guy named Paul Henry in New Zealand when I was touring there last November and December. And he kept mentioning 10 years. This was right after I'd done this analysis, and he kept saying 10 years, and I kept telling him, no, you don't have 10 years. Our species doesn't have 10 years, and you don't have 10 years either. It's less. We don't know how long it is, but it's almost certainly less based on the fact that we add these things up, taking the most conservative route I could possibly take, and we get to 22 degrees, we get the hothouse in 10 years, 9 years roughly from now. If I take a less conservative approach and assume that the incredibly conservative referee journal literature is actually not very conservative at all, I get us up to there. The highest temperature ever achieved by Earth in the last 2 billion years, 9 years from now. I'm not suggesting we have 9 years. It could be a lot less. Carana went on to do an analysis, this is about 2 weeks ago, at the Arctic News blog. And he indicates we could have 10°C warmer, 10°C above baseline again, by 2021. And what he's doing differently this time, instead of adding up all those pieces that I just mentioned, instead of adding up the albedo effect and the loss of global dimming, and the 10-year lag in carbon dioxide emissions to maximum heating, so instead of adding those up in linear fashion, let's take instead an exponential function and fit it to the existing data. Instead of taking a linear approach, let's look at what has happened in the past with abrupt climate change events and appears to be happening this time. And then he says it's 4 years, and I'm not suggesting that you have 3 years and 364 days and that you'll die in your sleep on that night, whatever night that is. What I'm suggesting is that it will seem rather short. And here's the best case I can come up with for that. The world's oldest human being at the time, in early March of 2015, turned 117 years old. And at her 117th birthday party, she was asked by a journalist to ponder those first 117 years of her life. And she said, and I quote, it's only 4 words, hang with me on this one, it seemed rather short. She was 117, she's at her birthday party. What's that like to live 117 years? It seemed rather short. And then, to put a punctuation mark on her message and mine, she died a few weeks later. It seemed rather short. I don't know how much time we have. She thought it had seemed rather short. I guarantee nobody in this room is going to live to 117. And if you do, I won't be here to track me down, to prove me wrong. It could be much faster than this even. Natalia Shukova and colleagues, 3 of her colleagues, at the European Geophysical Union meeting in late 2008, wrote an abstract, and then she presented the paper, Natalia Shukova did, pointing out that release of up to 50 gigatons of methane hydrate from the relatively shallow sea floor of the Arctic Ocean is highly possible for abrupt release at any time. This is almost 10 years ago. 2 years ago, she came out in an interview and said, we never stated that such a release would occur in near or distant future. We never stated. You can go online. Most of you have a digital device in your pocket right now that will allow you to go online, look up the European Geophysical Union meeting abstracts from 2008, find the paper by Natalia Shukova and other colleagues pointing out this direct quote. She then lied later and said, we never stated this would occur. Isn't that interesting? She had been heavily censored by her university at that point. If that occurs, and it's highly possible for abrupt release at any time, if that occurs this summer, for example, when it appears we're going to experience the first ice-free Arctic in human history, an event forecasted by the U.S. Naval Postgraduate College in 2013 as will occur in 2016 plus or minus 3 years. So they predicted it to occur in 2016 plus or minus 3 years. I'd say we dodged a bullet 4 years in a row, but then we aren't going to dodge it forever. Is this the year of the ice-free Arctic? It certainly looks like we're headed that direction. But maybe not. Maybe it'll hold off for another year or 2. If that happens, how do we avoid this big burst of methane coming out of the Arctic Ocean? I can't imagine we do. When that happens, we're well above the temperature at which human beings have persisted at any time in the past. That's enough to take out the ability to grow grains and therefore the ability to maintain civilization, because this civilization, like all others, depends upon the ability to grow and distribute grains at scale. Without that, civilization fails. And now we're at about 6 degrees Celsius by maybe the middle of next year, because the crops all fail. Habitat, habitat, habitat. It's not as if we weren't warned. The director of the United Nations Environment Program for New York was quoted by the Associated Press, and as consequences appeared in every significant newspaper in the United States on the 29th of June 1989. And he said governments have a 10-year window of opportunity to solve the greenhouse effect before it, quote, goes beyond human control. If I'm doing the math right, that was 39, 38, 30, but do I hear 28?
18 years ago.
Do I hear 28 years ago that he was quoted in saying this?
28.
So apparently we had until 1999 to fix this. And we didn't fix it, did we? In fact, I think every year, certainly almost every year, since 1989, and certainly every decade since then, we've set a new record for carbon emissions. The exception is the last 2 years. In the last 2 years, anthropogenic carbon emissions are down because we're in the midst of the Great Depression, version 2.0. And so humans are not burning nearly as much carbon as they used to. However, Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased to record levels in each of those 2 years. In fact, each of the last 4 years, it's set a new record. It appears the situation has spun out of human control. Because our emissions have been reduced, and yet carbon dioxide and methane are still going exponential in the atmosphere. Not long after this, a year and a couple of months later, the United Nations Advisory Group on Greenhouse Gases points out that 1 degree C is the absolute upper limit. That's the target. That's a scientific target, not the 2 degrees C established by a wacko economist that everybody believed, even though he's an economist. The United Nations Advisory Group on Greenhouse Gases points out that beyond 1 degree C may elicit rapid, unpredictable, and nonlinear responses. I call them self-reinforcing feedback loops. Other people call them positive feedbacks. There's a system spinning out of human control. And this is where the United Nations group of scientists gets it exactly right with their focus on, I'm going to say it again, habitat, habitat, habitat. Could lead to extensive ecosystem damage, such as haboobs, which that's a word we never even used in the Northern Hemisphere until 5 years ago. Now we get one every year. We never used terms like thunderstorm asthma, rain bombs. Those terms didn't exist 5 years ago. Now we have this whole new terminology for abrupt climate change and the consequences of abrupt climate change. That's October of 1990. Within a few years, the United Nations capitulated to an economist and decided that 2 degrees C was the target, and that's what they continue to promulgate at these meetings. But 1 degree C was the target, and according to science writer and speaker David Spratt, half a degree was probably closer to the truth. That's when things started spinning out of control. That's when self-reinforcing feedback loops kicked in. And this was a long time ago. This is way before Al Gore showed up. This is before James Hansen showed up in 1988 on the floor of Congress and pointed out that Houston, we have a problem. So, one of my messages here is that we didn't know. There's no blame, there's no shame, there's no guilt. We don't need to capitulate to any of that because we were born into captivity just like everybody else. We were born at a certain time in a certain place and we didn't get to vote on that. We showed up into this set of living arrangements and we lived like other people, like the culture was telling us to live. Most of us without questioning the culture, and what do you expect? That's where culture comes from. So we had our warnings and our response looks a lot like this. This is me. This is what we do. We call this progress, in fact. We got smartphones, it's all going to be fine. I speak about abrupt climate change, somebody says, is there an app for that? We got an app for everything, right? That's not bad enough, as the referee journal literature finally figured out a couple of years ago. We are in the midst of the 6th mass extinction. Entering the 6th mass extinction, I think that's a little conservative. Scientists have been writing books, albeit not published in the referee journal literature because that's too conservative. They've been writing books for 20 years that we're in the midst of the 6th mass extinction. The United Nations the United Nations report that came out in August of 2010 pointed out that we were driving to extinction 150 to 200 species a day. That doesn't count. We're now entering the 6th mass extinction in 2015. A little late to the party, I think. Love the scientific jargon for the title. Accelerated modern human-induced species losses. What the hell is that? And I guess if you put it in the title of a referee journal article, we're killing everything, that's not going to sell. In an interview coincident with the release of this paper, the senior author, Gerardo Ceballos, says life would take many millions of years to recover. Of course it would, because that's what happens in the wake of every mass extinction event so far. It takes many millions of years to recover, and our species itself, our favorite species, would likely disappear early on. He was wrong about that, because at this point we're already 5 years after we're driving 150 to 200 species to extinction every day, and we're not among them. Good point. Well, we will be. Our species was not among the first to disappear. thousands of others were. But we don't have long. In the end, it will seem rather short. I have good news for you. I do have a version with a happy ending. Unlike Hollywood. I wouldn't leave you to stew in your own juices, as was spoken about me lately in the S-Town podcast put out by National Public Radio. National Public Radio puts together this 6.5-hour podcast, and the key figure in the whole story was a guy named John B. McLemore, and it was called the S-Town podcast, short for Shit Town, because John B. McLemore referred to his small town in Alabama as Little Shit Town, Alabama. John would call me on the phone every week or so and talk to me about the dire straits we're in. And he had read a couple of my books. And the podcast was actually very fair and reasonable. And then Richard Heinberg of the Post-Carbon Institute writes about the podcast. He said something like Surviving S-Town Podcast, that's the title. And he concludes that I caused the suicide of John B. McLemore. Just as dozens of conventional and even mainstream media people, to the extent mainstream people will take on this topic, conclude that I drove my friend Michael C. Rupert to suicide in April of 2014. So apparently, me talking about this causes people to commit suicide. And that's why now I have the happy ending. You wondered where I was going with that. The happy ending is we get to die. Oh wait, maybe I said that a little abruptly. Yeah, it's interesting. I hear this millennial phrase YOLO all the time. Anybody ever heard that? YOLO? What's it mean?
You only live once.
Yeah, that's wrong. That's wrong. It's YODO. You only die once. You live every day. If you want. If you choose, you get to live and live fully every single day. YODO. You only die once. Someday we will all die. But you knew that. I knew that finally when I turned 11. Before that point, I knew that everybody died, but I wasn't sure it was going to affect me. And then I turned 11, my grandmother died, and it occurred to me, hey, this almost certainly means I'm going to die too. So you've known this for a while. I'm just here to remind you. And to remind you that it will seem rather short. And to ask you what you'll do in the intervening time. How will you live in light of your terminal diagnosis given to you at birth? I suggest various actions. I suggest that you remain calm, or if you're not calm, that you get that way. Because nothing is under control, certainly not under your control, certainly not under my control. The people pulling the strings of empire don't include the people in this room. Unless, Mark Austin, you're out there. We're not in control. I don't think they're in control either. We think that they're in control, but they're really not. They're just juggling chickens and chainsaws, trying to hold the system together for another day. They don't know what's going on. Abrupt climate change is going to affect them too. In fact, one of my favorite things about near-term human extinction resulting from abrupt climate change, and there aren't very many of my favorite things about that, but perhaps my favorite thing about near-term human extinction is that the jerks die too. Remain calm, nothing is under control. When somebody cuts you off in traffic, it could be worse. Second, and there will be no reward for this. No external reward, no monetary reward. No power will come your way as a result of pursuing excellence in a culture of mediocrity.
There's no reward for not pursuing excellence in a competitive society.
You're right. There's no reward for any damn thing. You're a bummer, aren't you? Librarian, security? Security, can we get her out of here? Stealing my lines here. In a culture of mediocrity, there is no external reward for pursuing excellence, for doing the right thing. But at the end of the day, You get to do something that not a lot of people get to do. You get to look yourself in the mirror without embarrassment. That's all you've ever had. That's all we've ever had. Is the ability to look at ourselves and not judge harshly. Similarly, pursuing love, especially if your love is of living instead of making a living, will not get you a lot. Except again, that feeling when you're taking your last breath that it wasn't all for naught. That you did get to look yourself in the mirror. That you did serve as a model for your children and your grandchildren and the other people around you. What more could you want? Other actions I encourage are to act more like your dog than you, especially if your dog is house trained. When you take your dog on a walk, I'm pretty sure you could even get away with this in this town, no leash needed. Your dog sees 4 trees and a sun when you take him out to the park and there's 4 trees and a sun. You don't. I don't. I see all kinds of things and the trees and the sun are not among them. So I see the podium I'm standing behind, I see the choir I'm preaching to, I see the woman in my life who's not very happy, I see my busted laptop and the keyboard gone awry, I'm driving my car, I'm hearing the music in my head. So that's mostly what we do, is we live in the past and we live in the future and we don't live in the now. And that's why your dog is happier than you are. Take a lesson. We were all born into captivity, but we don't have to reinforce the bars. We can throw off some of the shackles of culture. We can not be the person who goes to school and then goes to school some more and has 2.5 children and works as a slave, as my friend Forrest Palmer calls it, the slave, that's what he calls his job. He's a black man, an African American living in Houston, so he can get away with using the word slave, whereas most of us can't, without negative connotation coming our way. So we don't have to do the same thing everybody else does every single day. I'm not suggesting that everybody quit their job. That didn't work out all that well for me, trust me. But maybe if you aren't enjoying your job, maybe if your job is more like a treadmill than a joyful experience, maybe you could cut back a little bit. Maybe you couldn't take it so damn seriously. Maybe you could spend time with people you love, doing the things you love, instead of serving the corporate masters who run the whole show anyway. Maybe you don't have to use the expectations of others to reinforce your own cage. Oh, there's more. If you want to delve into the science of what I'm talking about and try to disprove anything I've just said, and I would way more than welcome that, trust me. You can go to a single essay at Nature Best Last. You can, if you want to go beyond that, beyond the science, and think about how to live in light of your terminal diagnosis. I co-authored a book with Carolyn Baker called Extinction Dialogues. Probably you cannot see the subtitle from back there. It says, How to Live with Death in Mind. How do you live with death over your left shoulder? You live with urgency. You live as if the days matter. You live as if the people matter, the people in your life. You live as if the planet matters, the planet within your circle. So this book, co-written by my colleague and counselor and history teacher, goes beyond the science and describes what we might do about that. And then, if you're interested in this set of living arrangements, industrial civilization or the industrial economy or whatever you want to call it, the story we tell ourselves about ourselves, this book is intended for ages 11 and up and was written by my partner and I from the perspective of insects, Ms. Ladybug and Mr. Honeybee, a love story at the end of time. And in language inspired by Charlotte's Web and other great children's books, it describes what we're doing to our only home and how we might live in light of our terminal diagnosis. And there's a few copies of that book on the shelf back there. And finally, Pauline and I have developed a workshop called Only Love Remains. It's for people who have concluded that sure enough, there might be something to this abrupt climate change, and in fact, my life might be rather short. And you're having a difficult time coming to grips with that conclusion. And if that's you, we have put together this workshop for you so that we can form a community. And that's something I would encourage for the people here, is to create an opportunity for yourselves, not even including this workshop. Maybe somebody passes around a sign-up sheet and somebody takes responsibility for curating that sign-up sheet by sending the first email message that says we're going to meet at XYZ the third Thursday of every month. If you want to be there to have the conversation nobody else is willing to have, let's just be there and have a drink, or share a meal, or have a conversation. There are ways forward in light of our terminal demise, in light of our terminal diagnosis. There are ways forward that involve joy, that involve happiness, that involve embracing reality for what it is, and still living as if the moments matter, still living as if the people in your life matter. And that's what this is all about. And blah, 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 that's enough of that. I would be happy if somebody could launch a question or two my way. Yes, sir.
Early
Can
on,
we turn on the lights now that we're done with this?
Can I say, please, I have made delicious appetizers, so I hope you all will stick around. I don't know when I'm supposed to get those out, so while we have the question.
Why don't we do question and answer for maybe 20 minutes, and then I'll stay here as long as anybody wants to stay here and we can talk one-on-one. So let's break out the appetizers. Let's break out the appetizers and say 20 minutes. Is that okay? Yes.
Eric has a question?
okay,
Yes, you have a question.
early in the presentation, you mentioned all 440 nuclear power plants melting down.
Right.
What would cause that?
That would cause, the demise of civilization would cause that. Because the demise of civilization means that the petrodollar no longer has value. And who's going to go to the nuclear power plants to maintain them when there's no monetary reward for doing so? David, in a documentary film created by Pauline Schneider called Going Dark, released in 2015, she interviewed David Jasko, the most recent ex-head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission of the United States, and asked him, here we are at Indian Point Nuclear Power Facility, right outside of New York City. If we start decommissioning it right now, how long would that take to decommission it?
17.78 years.
And he said, the most recent ex-head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission says, 60, and they didn't realize that number was too big. So he says 60 or 50 years if we start right now and we have the money.
Yeah, but the series part only goes 17.8.
60 or 50 years to decommission one nuclear power plant that we're not working on decommissioning, whose license expired years ago and continues to operate without a license. And there's 400 more, just like that one, that we're not beginning to decommission either. That will take at least 17.78 years to decommission if we start right now and throw a lot of money at it. And we aren't. Well, what happens? If people don't go to work, and even first responders don't go to work beyond a couple of days because they go home to be with their family members. In the case of a real emergency, people are only going to try to stick the fingers in the dike for a limited amount of time. They'll stop going to the nuclear power plant. We don't have 50 or 60 years without sea level rise overwhelming a whole bunch of those nuclear power plants, because almost all of them are built on the coast where it's relatively cool. And the demise of the petrodollar, and on and on and on the list goes. The inability to grow grains at scale defines every civilization so far, including this one. If we don't have grains grown at scale, we don't have civilization, which means we don't have the petrodollar, which means people are not paid to go to work to decommission nuclear power plants, much less keep them running safely.
So is it the methane release that would cause something catastrophic like that, where you worry about food for a few days and then
That could
you don't
be.
think anymore?
It could be the methane, or it could be the combination of methane release from the Arctic Ocean and any number of the other 60-some self-reinforcing feedback loops that combine. There was a paper in Truth Out in April of 2015, I think. But if you go to Truth Out and just put in the search box, agriculture on the brink. What it really said was what the article really described is civilization on the brink. Because the title was agriculture on the brink, but agriculture for the purposes of this article meant growing grains at scale. And the article pointed out that we're already on the edge. We're already at the very upper limit of the point at which we're able to grow grains at scale in the United States and Russia and Asia, and the very few places where we're growing enough grains to support all these people. So it could be that we reach that tipping point faster than expected. Here's an example. Last weekend in western Kansas, there was a snow and hailstorm that came way too late after a winter that was way too mild. The too mild winter meant that the wheat grew too tall, and the early cold storm destroyed a huge fraction of this year's winter wheat crop. It's done. Do you know how much wheat the United States has in storage? You know, there's always a bunch of storage. In the financial crisis, the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009, the United States sold all its grain supplies, all the storage. We got nothing. We're the civilization that's no longer a civilization. We don't have any food stored.
That's why they grow it in labs.
We got like canned peaches in our cupboards. You're on your own, folks. So civilization, agriculture truly teeters on the brink because of the direct interconnection between civilization and the ability to grow grains at scale. And then you tack on those self-reinforcing feedback loops and it all goes.
I just wanted to say that I am a Buddhist. I have been raised as a Buddhist since I was an infant, and I think you missed the main point of Buddhism, actually. And Buddhists believe mainly not just in right action and right living, but there's a reason we believe in right action and right living, and it's because we don't believe that life has a beginning and an end point. Matter cycles and energy flows, and life is energy. So we try to live our lives and practice as if this is not our end. We are going to continue because life is eternal. Energy cycles. Matter cycles and energy flows. So once we're leaving this existence, we're not going to just go and be gone and done with. So we try to live life every day as if we're not going to be gone.
Right. Sorry to
That's
give
my
the
experience, and that's the main point of Buddhism.
I'm not trying to give a course in Buddhism here.
No, I know.
I was just picking a couple of minor examples and trying to weave it into the story. Okay. My apologies for apparently misrepresenting your perspective. I've been heavily influenced by the philosophy, if not the religion, of Buddhism. The part you just talked about, the religion part. I've been heavily influenced by the philosophy part, as were Nietzsche and Schopenhauer. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I'm sorry if you kind of addressed this in other parts of your work. I think I might not be as familiar as some people here. But I was just wondering what you think about, like, so Naomi Klein a couple of years ago released a book called This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate, in which she argues that there is a possibility for broad social movements, not like the ruling class and not people on the top, but broad social movements to kind of coalesce together to enact like systemic change that could mitigate the worst effects of climate change and also kind of, you know, make human settlements more resilient and stop burning more fossil fuels. And I was wondering if you have, so from this speech, I didn't get a lot of sense that that's something that you, I don't know, what do you think about that?
Possibility is what she's asking.
Tim Garrett wrote his first paper. Tim Garrett is an associate professor at the time he wrote the paper. I think he's a full professor now at the University of Utah. And he is an atmospheric scientist who focuses on the thermodynamics of climate change at a large scale. And he concluded in a paper written in 2007, published in November 2009, pulled from publication immediately thereafter because there was a huge outcry from the scientific community because scientists didn't like the answer. It was subsequently published in February 2011 for real, and you can find it under the February 2011, in the February 2011 edition of Climatic Change, one of the more prestigious journals in the world. And he points out that civilization is a heat engine. Civilization is a heat engine. This was published in November 2009, but immediately pulled from publication because scientists rebelled and said, you can't attack civilization. Naomi Klein is the best anti-capitalist capitalist in the world. She claims to be against capitalism and she benefits greatly from capitalism. The making of the documentary film, This Changes Nothing, everything, was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. You think they're going to willingly allow civilization to go away? Of course not. Do you think she's a fan of that? So she points at capitalism as if any ism is the problem. What does she suggest we replace capitalism with? More capitalism. She doesn't call it that, though. Civilization itself is a heat engine. It doesn't matter if we power it with wind turbines and solar panels, it still is a heat engine. That's the gist of Tim Garrett's now extensive body of work. That's the bad news. Civilization is a heat engine. And it's why we're here. It's what keeps us alive. I rely just as much as you do on electricity and water coming out of the taps. I rely just as much as you do on food at the grocery store. Civilization is the heat engine that drives to extinction 150 to 200 species every day and fouls the air and dirties the water and washes the soil into the ocean and all that. It's horrible. And it's a heat engine. That's the bad news. The worst news, it's hard to believe, there's a worse news. The worst news is when civilization goes away, according to Referee Journal article report from 2013, no doubt very conservative, when the civilization goes away, when the omnicidal heat engine breaks down, the planet heats up really, really fast. Like about 3 degrees Celsius in a week or two. Now we're at 4.6 degrees Celsius above baseline. Within a matter of weeks, maybe months, after civilization breaks down. Because at the same time civilization is producing greenhouse gases that hold the heat close to the earth, the blankets that we put on every winter are held there in the summer as well. In addition to producing greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and chlorofluorocarbons and water vapor and nitrous oxides and on, and methane. In addition, by burning fossil fuels, especially by burning coal and particularly by burning low quality coal, we put sulfates into the atmosphere. These sulfates, or aerosols, serve as an umbrella. So at the same time we're putting blankets over us, we're also putting an umbrella over us. If we stop putting the particulates up into the atmosphere, they all fall out every day. We put more up every day. If we stop putting them up, they all fall out. They all fall down. And the global average temperature heats up about 3 degrees Celsius in a matter of days. September 14th, 2001, a researcher went out and asked the question, I wonder about those planes that stopped flying in the United States. We're still all burning coal. All those other planes were flying everywhere else in the world 3 days after 9/11. I wonder if that affects the global average temperature signature. 3 days later, it did. Because of a reduction in commercial air flights in the United States. That's how sensitive the planetary temperature is to relatively small changes in our collective behavior. So, we either keep the omnicidal heat engine known as civilization going, which is awful, or we turn it off, which means we die soon. So the one way we die really fast, and the other way we die really fast.
What is your plan for us?
That's a great question. It reminds me of a quote by Mike Tyson. You probably all know the boxer, Mike Tyson, who's now a philosopher. Did you know that? He has a one-man show. And this is my favorite line of his. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. So we've been punching the plan in the face for some 300 years. We've been punching plan in the face, and we expect something other than where we're at. I don't have a plan.
Nada.
Okay.
I'm living fully. I've given people 9 actions they can take that I think are quite reasonable to pursue excellence, to pursue love, to remain calm, and all those other things you're shaking your head about. You can read about the...
You didn't mention pursuing non-excellence.
For some,
My hobby.
apparently, that's a pursuit of excellence in and of itself.
Okay, there you have it.
Lloyd Blankfein and Jamie Dimon are not interested in pursuing the kind of excellence that we're talking about here. Some might call that pursuing hedonism. Knock yourself out. Party like it's 1999.
You were saying that geoengineering is not a viable option, and I think the reason you said that primarily was because you feel we're beyond the tipping point. We're at the point of no return, or we've already passed the point of no return. Is that the reason you said that, or is there another reason why you said that?
No, these 2 bodies I mentioned, the United States National Academy of Sciences and a European body of similar stature, concluded that geoengineering is not a viable solution because they looked at the referee journal literature and concluded that the most common form of geoengineering is what's called solar radiation management. That's putting particulates into the sky artificially as opposed through what we normally do by burning coal. And so they looked at the record. They looked at things like Pinatubo, the volcano that went off in 1987, and they discovered that there's a slight decrease in global average temperature, at least a slight slowing of the increase in temperature over time with a volcano eruption. But then when the particles fall out of the atmosphere, the heating proceeds even faster than it was going before. So these 2 reports synthesize this enormous collection of evidence and conclude that actually geoengineering isn't going to fix, isn't going to repair climate change. In fact, it's probably going to make things worse.
But they were only looking at one form of
No. I gave that as an example of the most common the most commonly proposed means of geoengineering is solar radiation management. But they also looked at throwing iron filings into the ocean. They looked at all known proposed solutions that fall in the category of geoengineering.
You're talking about known today, but technology has a way of taking leaps and bounds, whether it's by alien influence or epiphanies or what other way. So if technology can take leaps and bounds, the good news possibly could be that there's an answer we don't know about yet because we haven't arrived to it yet, but there is a possibility that something would be developed that could help cool down our planet.
Of course. I don't know when you're going to die. I don't know when we're going to go extinct. We might come up with the requisite 3,000 miracles to keep this game going while not further damaging the planet. It could happen. I just came from San Francisco, California, from Berkeley actually, interacted with an individual who came across my work in December. And he's in a position of enormous privilege and he has access to a lot of money. And he just refuses to believe that there is no answer. So we had a little panel discussion, we had 2 presentations, and I talked to him, and I like him a lot. And I'm going to go see him Monday. We'll spend a week with him in Seattle, where he lives, where he used to be a manager of strategic corporate operations for Microsoft. And I'm going to have the conversation with him that very few people are willing to have, because I'm looking for an answer too. I don't want humans to go extinct. I get that thrown at me all the time. Because I present this evidence, which seems so compelling to me, that we're headed for our own demise in the very near term, that doesn't mean I want it to happen. There's a long list of people I want dead, but I'm not.
Yeah.
And you're not on it, because we just only met. So I'm a huge fan of things that we might come up with. But I also think that it will seem rather short.
In your most recent hubris essay, you have, at least to me,
And she's talking about an article I wrote for the Weekly Hubris, which is a monthly
yes,
easy.
yes, I just read it, and I just felt very compelled that you were putting out the call to accelerate industrial collapse. Is that something you advocate, or how can I help with that? Is I guess what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Besides voting with my money and how I spend
Right.
it.
Right. So it's pretty clear that civilization is an omnicidal heat engine. If you haven't reached that conclusion yet, you really haven't been paying attention. And so there are horrible things associated with this story we tell ourselves about ourselves. We're killing all those other species. We're fouling the air and dirtying the water and destroying the soil, and this set of living arrangements is characterized by endemic racism and endemic misogyny, and just because we're nice people here doesn't mean that we aren't supporting a system that is absolutely horrible and horrific.